According to the Central Bureau of Statistics, Israel's economy was less affected compared to other OECD countries as a result of the pandemic. Let's speak to Vili Abraham, an economy expert who's been following this story closely. Hi, Vili. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So what exactly saved Israel from the fate of other OECD countries that, didn't do as well as Israel did? Why is the economy here more resilient?
Well, I think that the major factor is the fact that the government realized that it has to invest in technology. Because of COVID-19, all of us have been using technology a lot more frequently and more often than in the past. And investing in high-tech technology, for example, they invested tens of thousands of, millions of shekels in the high-tech industry in order to increase the number of employees in the industry and to bolster the digital transformation and to provide employment to tens of thousands of Israelis. So I think the investment in the high-tech industry was the right thing to do.
Okay, now how much of a factor in that is tourism? The sector has essentially shut down, but still Israel has been able to keep its head out of the water. And when you think about Israel, you think of it as a tourist hub of sorts. So why didn't tourism affect Israel more than it did?
Well, tourism accounts for 6% of GDP, which is slightly higher than the average in OECD countries, where it's about 4.4%. But if you look at the high-tech industry, exports account for high-tech exports account for 50% of all exports coming out of the country, contributing to some 50 billion shekels.
All right, still so many people are unemployed in Israel. A whole bunch of things are shut down, a lot of businesses. It certainly doesn't look like we're in the middle of a thriving economy.
No, well, the average Israeli does not feel it, but if you look at the investments in the high-tech industry, if you compare the first half of 2019 in comparison to the half of 2020, there were much more investments. We're talking about 4.5 billion shekels invested during the first 6 months of 2020, as opposed to 3.5 billion shekels invested during the first 6 months of 2019. So the economy overall is getting a boost, but yes, you're right. The average Israeli is not really feeling it because we still have over 20% of all Israelis who are unemployed. And really,
well, it's not to say that the pandemic, didn't affect Israel's economy at all. Of course, it has a large impact on the economy. So how can Israel come out of the deficit that it's in right now, even though it's not as bad as the other countries we're comparing it to?
well, probably what we'll have to do is increase both direct and indirect taxes, so both the income taxes that we're paying and indirect taxes like VAT, the 17% tax that you're paying on every item you purchase in the supermarket. They'll have to increase taxes and probably government fees for different services like, issuing passports or ID cards and other services, of course.
Would you say that there's certain things that Israel did better than other countries that they can look at Israel and take advice from?
Yes, well, if you look at one of the things that it did, it forged different economic agreements recently with UAE, which was a very smart move. And I think the most important thing is the investment in high tech. In this time when there are lockdowns, people work from home, and high-tech industry thrives, and you have to boost and invest and provide incentives for investing in the high-tech industry. And that's what it did. It put in a lot of money into the high-tech industry. And I think that's what other countries can learn, because you cannot invest in tourism. People are not moving. There are lockdowns. People are afraid of traveling. So I don't think there's any sense really in doing it right now, unless, you ease the restrictions and people can travel domestically. But, international tourism is really affected, and probably for the long term for different reasons, especially security reasons.
All right. Well, of course, we can only hope that the pandemic ends soon and we come out of this. Vili Abraham, thank you so much for your insight.
Pleasure.